My wife had been visiting her sister every Thursday for 2 years. Last Thursday I found out she does not have a sister. But that is not even the most shocking part. Tonight we have 5 stories where everything you think you know flips completely. In the final moment, every single one has an update that will leave you speechless. Stay until the end, because story 5 is the one nobody sees coming. Let me take you back to where this all started. Story 1 begins, my name is David. I am 41 years old, I live in Denver, Colorado, and 6 months ago I discovered that my wife of 9 years had been leaving our house every Thursday evening, telling me she was visiting her sister Sandra for 2 full years, and that Sandra does not exist. My wife's name is Carol. I had never met Sandra. Carol had always described her as living across town, somewhat private, not much for group gatherings, which explained why Sandra had never appeared at family events. I had spoken to Sandra on the phone twice, or rather, I had spoken to someone who had answered Carol's call and played the role of Sandra in 2 brief exchanges over the years when Carol had called her in front of me to sort out their plans for that evening. I want to tell you how I found out because the how is as significant as the what. 6 months ago I had a minor car accident on a Thursday evening. Nothing serious, but my car needed to be towed and I needed a ride. I called Carol. She did not answer. I called 4 more times over 20 minutes. I texted. No response. I eventually called a colleague for the ride. When Carol came home at 10 p.m., I told her what had happened and asked why she had not answered. She said her phone had been on silent. I asked where she had been. She said at Sandra's. I said I had called 5 times. She said she was sorry she had not checked her phone. Something in the exchange, the specific flatness of it, the answers that were just slightly too smooth, stayed with me. I did not say anything else that night. The following week I looked up Sandra. Not aggressively. I simply tried to find any trace of a person named Sandra with Carol's last name in our city, since Carol had told me years ago that Sandra had kept their family name after her own divorce. There was no trace. No social media, no public records, nothing. I then looked at our phone records. In 2 years of Thursday evenings, Carol had never once called or texted a number I could identify as Sandra's. The calls I had witnessed her make to Sandra had all been to a number I did not recognize that, when I searched it, appeared to belong to a prepaid phone. I sat with this for 3 weeks before I said anything. When I finally asked Carol directly, not accusatorially, I want to be clear about that, I asked as someone who was genuinely frightened of the answer. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she told me the truth. The Thursday evenings had been spent at a therapy group, a specific kind of support group. One for adults managing a condition Carol had been diagnosed with 4 years into our marriage, and had not told me about because she had been ashamed and had not known how to introduce the information once she had decided not to tell me at the beginning. She had been attending this group for 2 years. The Sandra character had been a cover story she had constructed because the cover story had felt easier than the conversation she had not been able to start. I want to be honest about what I felt when Carol told me. It was not anger, or not primarily. It was the specific grief of understanding that someone you love had been carrying something alone for years, because they had not trusted that you could hold it with them. And the grief of knowing that some part of that had been true. That there were ways I had responded to difficulty in our marriage that had made it reasonable for Carol to calculate that the cover story was safer than the truth. We are in therapy together now. Not the same group as Carol, individual therapy and couples therapy. I know about Carol's diagnosis. I am learning about it. There are Thursdays now where Carol goes to her group and I know where she is going and she does not need a cover story, and that difference, which sounds small when I describe it, is one of the more significant things in our marriage right now. Update 4 months later. Carol's group had a partners session last month. An evening where spouses or partners of group members were invited to attend, to learn about the condition and what support looked like in practice. I went. I sat in a room with 11 other people who were all, in various ways, learning to understand something about someone they loved that they had not fully understood before. The facilitator said something at the beginning that I have thought about every day since. She said that secrecy around mental health and relationships was almost never about the partner. It was almost always about fear, and that the fear was almost always older than the relationship itself. I thought about Carol and about 4 years in, and about a cover story called Sandra, and about 2 years of Thursday evenings, and about the phone call I had made from a roadside in the dark. And I thought that the roadside phone call had been the thing that had made the conversation finally necessary, and I was glad the accident had been minor. I drove home alone after the session. Carol had stayed to help clean up, and I thought about Thursday evenings and about what they contain now versus what they had contained before, and I thought the now version was better, and that better had been available the whole time, and that it was better late than the alternative. For Carol had a cover story for 2 years, but in story 2, the cover story had been running for 25 years, and it was not discovered by a spouse. It was discovered by a stranger on a DNA website. Here is what they found. My name is Patricia. I am 46 years old. I live in Atlanta, Georgia, and 2 years ago a DNA test I took out of general curiosity returned a result that restructured my understanding of my family, my father, and 25 years of what I had believed was a straightforward family history. My father's name is Robert. He is 71 years old and has been married to my mother for 48 years. I grew up in a family of 3 children, myself and 2 brothers, in a house that was, by any measure I could apply as a child, a normal and functioning family home. My father worked in sales, traveled occasionally, was present for the significant events, maintained the household. Nothing had ever suggested to me, in 46 years, that there was anything about my family's composition that I did not know. The DNA test result appeared on a Tuesday morning. A close family match. The platform categorized it as half-sibling level. A woman named Christine, 43 years old, 3 years younger than me. I stared at the result for a long time. I messaged Christine through the platform. She responded within an hour, which told me she had been checking her results frequently, which told me she had been expecting something. Christine had taken the test specifically because she had always known she was, as she put it, the complicated part of someone's family. Her mother had told her, when Christine was 18, that her biological father was a married man named Robert who had been her mother's partner, on and off, for the better part of a decade, roughly the same decade during which my younger brother had been born and I had been in elementary school. Christine's mother had ended the relationship when Christine was 8 years old and had raised Christine alone, with no contact from or with my father's family. Christine had known my father's name her entire adult life and had chosen not to make contact, had taken the DNA test with some ambiguity about whether she actually wanted a match, and had then received one and messaged back within an hour, which told me something about where she actually was. I called my mother before I called my father. This was a deliberate decision, and I believe it was the right one. My mother listened to everything I told her, and was quiet for a very long time. Then she said she needed to call me back. She called me back 4 hours later. She said she had always known something had happened during those years. Not the specifics, not Christine's existence, but the general shape of something she had chosen not to examine too closely because examining it had felt, at the time, like something she could not afford to do with 3 children in the house. She said she was not surprised in the way that meant she had known, but she was not shocked in the way that meant she had had no warning. I called my father that evening. He admitted everything within 5 minutes. Christine's existence, her mother, the years of it, the ending of it. He said he had spent 40 years believing it was behind him, and that he was wrong and that he was sorry. I told him sorry was a beginning, and that the middle and the end were going to require more than that. Christine and I have met 3 times. The first time was the most careful and the most significant. 2 women in a coffee shop, one of whom had always known her family was incomplete, one of whom had had no idea, trying to figure out what they were to each other. Christine is, I have found, a person I genuinely like, which was not something I had known how to anticipate, and which has made the whole situation both easier and more complicated. My father has met Christine once. The meeting was my mother's idea, which surprised me more than almost anything else in this story. My mother said she had spent enough time managing the edges of something that had already happened, and that she would rather have it in the room where she could see it. I thought that was one of the braver things I had heard anyone say. Update 3 months later. Christine came to a family dinner last month. My mother's invitation, extended through me, accepted with what Christine described as the most nervous she had been about anything in years. My two brothers knew about Christine by then, and had various reactions that are their own stories to tell. The dinner was, honestly, one of the stranger evenings I have spent. A table that contained my parents, my brothers, their families, and a woman who was simultaneously a stranger, and someone who shared our DNA, and who had grown up on the outside of a family she had always known was partly hers. Christine brought a bottle of wine and was gracious and warm, and handled the evening with more composure than I think I would have managed in her position. My mother sat next to her at dinner. At some point I looked across the table and they were talking quietly about something. I could not hear what. And I thought that the two people at that table who had the most legitimate reason to find the evening difficult were handling it with more grace than almost anyone else present. And I thought that grace was sometimes the thing that was left when there was nothing easier available. Patricia found a half-sister she never knew existed. But story 3 is about someone who found out. The person they had known their whole life was not who they thought. And the discovery came not through DNA, not through a phone call, but through a box of photographs they were never supposed to see. Here is what was in the box. My name is Michael. I am 44 years old. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and 18 months ago I was clearing out my late mother's house after her passing when I found, in the back corner of her attic, a sealed cardboard box that contained approximately 200 photographs, a bundle of letters, and a marriage certificate with my mother's name on it. A marriage certificate dated 15 years before she had married my father, and that listed a man I had never heard of as her husband. My mother's name was Eleanor. She had passed at 78 after a short illness and had been, in every version of her that I had known in 44 years, a woman who had been married once, to my father, Gerald, who had preceded her in death by 6 years, and whose life before her marriage to my father had been described, in the few times it had come up, as a quiet young adulthood in the city where she had grown up, working as a secretary, saving money, not much to tell. The photographs told a different story. They showed my mother in her 20s, clearly her same face, the specific young woman version of the face I had known my whole life, in what appeared to be a full and rich life that bore no resemblance to the quiet young adulthood she had described. There were photographs of her at parties, on what appeared to be international trips, with groups of people who were clearly close friends, and in many of them with a man, the same man consistently, throughout the photographs, clearly significant, clearly someone she had loved. The marriage certificate confirmed what the photographs suggested. My mother had been married before my father, for 7 years, to a man named Thomas Wheeler. Before a divorce I found no record of her ever mentioning to anyone. The letters in the bundle were between my mother and Thomas, across the early years of their marriage. Warm, funny, specific, the letters of two people who were genuinely happy. The last letter was from Thomas, dated approximately 1 year before the estimated date of the divorce, and it was different in tone from the others. Careful, sad, and it referenced something that had happened that I could piece together, from context, involved a pregnancy that had not resulted in a living child, and a grief that the letter suggested had changed something between them that they had not been able to repair. I spent 3 days with that box before I told my siblings, a sister and a brother, both younger, neither of whom had any more knowledge of this than I had. My sister's first response was that we needed to find Thomas Wheeler. My brother's first response was that we needed to understand why she had never told us. We did both. Thomas Wheeler was 82 years old, and living in assisted living in the city where he and my mother had apparently spent their marriage. We contacted the facility and through some careful navigation, were able to speak with Thomas's daughter, a daughter from his second marriage, who was aware of my mother, or at least aware that her father had been married before, and who facilitated a phone call. Thomas, despite his age, was clear-minded and warm. He remembered my mother with what was obvious and uncomplicated love across 50 years of distance, that he said she had been the most alive person he had ever known, and that what had happened to them had been one of the sadnesses of his life, and that he had thought of her often. He did not know she had passed. We told him. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he was glad she had had a good life and children who were looking through her things carefully enough to find a box in an attic. Update 4 months later. Thomas passed away 2 months after our phone call, according to his daughter, who contacted us. She sent us a photograph, one we had not seen in the box, that Thomas apparently had kept separately, of our mother and Thomas together, young, somewhere sunny, both of them laughing at something outside the frame. My sister had it framed. It is on her mantel now, next to a photograph of our mother from her wedding to our father, and next to a photograph of our mother in her 70s, in her garden, which is how most of us picture her now. 3 versions of the same woman, across 50 years, and we only knew one of them in person, and she was all of them simultaneously. And I think about that whenever I visit my sister's mantel and look at the laughing young woman in the sunny photograph, and think about a box in an attic, and about all the lives a person contains that the people who love them do not always get to see. Michael found his mother's hidden life in a box. But in story 4, the hidden life was not in the past. It was happening right now, in real time, and the person living it was someone who shared her last name. Here is what she found when she looked more carefully. My name is Angela. I am 38 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, and 14 months ago I received a phone call from an HR manager at a company I had never worked at, calling to verify my employment dates and job title before extending a formal offer. The HR manager was cheerful and efficient, and clearly expected the call to take 5 minutes. It took considerably longer. My sister's name is Diane. She is 35 and we have always had a complicated relationship. Not hostile, but never the close sisterhood I had hoped for, marked by a specific competitiveness on Diane's side that I had attributed to the particular dynamics of our family, and had tried not to take personally. What Diane had done was present herself in a job application as me. Not my name, but my professional history. She had listed my employer, my job title, my years of service, and my professional achievements as her own, verbatim, on her resume, with the modification of her own name at the top. The reference the HR manager was calling to verify was listed as Angela, a current supervisor, which Diane had apparently intended to intercept by listing a phone number she controlled, but which the HR manager had as a standard precaution, independently sourced through the company's main directory instead. That independently sourced number was mine. I listened to the HR manager describe the resume she was looking at. I recognized every line of it. I told the HR manager, as calmly as I could manage, that there appeared to have been a mistake and that I would need to call her back, and then I sat with the phone in my hand for about 10 minutes before I called Diane. Diane answered on the second ring. I read her the job title and employer and achievements the HR manager had described. There was a silence that told me everything before she said anything. Then she said she had not thought I would find out. I told her that was apparent and that I needed her to understand what she had done. Not just the professional and potentially legal implications, which were significant, but the fact that she had used my professional identity, the one I had built over 15 years of work, without my knowledge or consent, for her own benefit. Diane said she had needed the job and her own resume had not been strong enough. I told her I was sorry her resume was not strong enough, and that the solution to that was not to take mine. I called the HR manager back and told her that the resume she had been given contained professional history that did not belong to the applicant, and that she would need to assess the application accordingly. The HR manager thanked me and the offer was not extended. Diane was furious with me for this. She called 3 times that evening with varying levels of anger, eventually landing on a version of the argument that I had ruined her opportunity by telling the truth, which I found difficult to engage with productively. Our relationship has been in a specific suspended state since. Not severed. We speak occasionally, at family events, but the specific competitiveness I had been attributing to family dynamics for years now had an additional layer of meaning that I was still working through. Update 3 months later. Diane got a job last month. Her own job, her own resume, at a company in a different field from mine. She called to tell me, which surprised me, and which I received as something. She did not apologize for what she had done, but the call itself felt like an acknowledgement of something. That she was capable of getting there on her own, which I had always believed, and that whatever she had been trying to shortcut had been something she had not needed to shortcut. I told her I was glad and that I meant it. She said she knew. We talked for about 20 minutes about the new job, and then about other things, and it was the most ordinary conversation we had had in over a year. Ordinary felt significant. I am taking it as a beginning rather than a resolution, and I think that is the right way to hold it. Angela's sister used her identity. Our final story tonight. Story 5 is about an identity that was not stolen. It was given away, voluntarily, by someone who had been living as two different people for 30 years, and who finally told the truth at the age of 71. Here is what he said. My name is Thomas. I am 43 years old. I live in Chicago, Illinois, and 8 months ago my father sat down at his own 71st birthday dinner. 12 family members, a restaurant, a cake with his name on it, and told us between the main course and dessert that the name on the cake was not his real name. He had been using it for 30 years. His real name was different. Not slightly different. Completely different first and last name, a name none of us had ever heard, belonging to a version of him that predated us entirely. My father's name, the name we had always known, was Gerald Morris. The name he was born with, and had lived under for the first 41 years of his life, was a name I will not write here because it still feels, 8 months later, like information I have not fully integrated, but which was as unfamiliar to me as any stranger's name when I first heard it. Gerald. I am going to keep calling him that because he is still my father and Gerald is still how I know him. Had legally changed his name 30 years ago. He had done so through a court process that was entirely legal, and that had left no loose threads except the ones he had tied himself, in his own history, by never telling his second family, which was us, that the first chapter of his life had a different name on the cover. My father's explanation, delivered at a birthday dinner with 12 people watching, was unexpectedly simple. He said he had made serious mistakes in his early life, under his original name, mistakes he described as financial and personal, and the kind that follow a person, and that he had wanted to start over with a clean name, and had done so legally and had then met our mother, and built a life and had always intended to tell us and had never found the right time, and that 71 had seemed, when he woke up that morning, like a reasonable deadline. The table was quiet in a way birthday dinners are not usually quiet. My mother, sitting next to him, was not surprised. She had known since before their marriage, and had kept his confidence for 35 years. She looked at the rest of us with an expression I can only describe as relieved exhaustion. The look of someone who has been holding something for a very long time, and has just been allowed to put it down. The mistakes my father referenced were, when he eventually elaborated over subsequent conversations, substantial but not criminal. Financial failures that had ruined relationships with people he had owed money to and felt he could not face. A first marriage that had ended badly, and that he had not known how to address or disclose. A version of himself he had believed he could leave behind completely if he left the name behind with it. He had been, in many ways, right. Gerald Morris had been a good father, a faithful husband the second time. A person who had built something real and lasting under a borrowed name. But the original name had been waiting, as original names do, and 71 had been his deadline. We are all still processing. My brothers have had different reactions than I have. One of them found the legal name change almost funny, in a dark way, and the other has been genuinely shaken by it. I find myself somewhere in between. Neither finding it funny nor finding it devastating, but finding it the most accurate possible confirmation of something I have always suspected about the people we love, which is that they contain more chapters than the ones we have been given access to, and that sometimes the other chapters arrive at birthday dinners without warning. Update. 4 months later. My father celebrated his 72nd birthday last month. Smaller dinner this time, just immediate family at home. My mother made the cake. It had Gerald on it, because that is still what we call him and what he answers to and what he has been for 30 years. Sometime during the evening my youngest niece, who is 7 and had not been at last year's dinner, asked my father what his favorite thing about his birthday was. He thought about it and said his favorite thing was that everyone he loved was in the same room knowing the same things about him, and that this was the first birthday he had been able to say that. My niece accepted this completely, in the way 7-year-olds accept things, and asked if she could have more cake. My father said yes and cut her another slice, and I watched him do it and thought about 30 years of a name, and about a birthday dinner, and about a man who had given himself a deadline and met it, and was now in a room where everyone knew the same things, and I thought that knowing the same things, even late, even at 71, was still worth more than not knowing.